Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Enterprise Doctor Business Show. This episode is an edited version of a recent show that went out on Marlow FM. It was broadcast live and it's called The Business Show. And what I do is I edit that version down to remove the copyright material, which is the news adverts, unfortunately the music, and I then put it out as this podcast. I have two guests on the show as a rule, and I first chat with them about themselves and their businesses, and we then move on to the business news stories that we have chosen to discuss. If you want to look at what those business news stories are yourself, then if you go to the notes wherever you're listening to me now, you will find links in there to those business news stories. And what you will also find is links to the pieces of music that we talk about and that we played live on the radio. If you already know those songs, then maybe it's nice to listen to them again. And if you don't know those songs, which is often the case because they're sometimes quite eclectic, then maybe have a listen and you will have heard why those pieces of music were chosen, which will hopefully add a little something to it. Whether you like the music or the business conversations or both, I hope you enjoy the show. And a good afternoon to one and all. This is Marlow FM 97.5. My name is Mark Harris, and for the third week in a row, I'm doing the business show. That little jingle just now where Lawrence said that we do alternate weeks, I think aspirational is a good word. This is my third in a row. He's then going to do three in a row, and we'll see what the world holds in store after that. Normally on my show I have a couple of guests and we talk about business news stories, and today I'm delighted. It's a little different. I'm delighted for two reasons. One is because a bit of variety is good for me, and the other is because of the particular people and the particular topic that I have in the studio. The topic is the new Marlow Film Studios, or I should say the proposed new Marlow Film Studios, and because this is the business show, we're going to be focusing on that as a business and also on the impact of that coming to Marlow, the impact on businesses in Marlow, how it might be to their benefit or detriment. And I have two people in the studio who are both very qualified to talk on that subject. The first is Robert Laycock, who's the founder and CEO of Marlow Film Studios, so you don't really get any higher than that. How are you, Robert?
I'm really well, Mark. It's so lovely to be here and talk to you.
Good, and I believe this is its first visit on the business show, but not your first visit to Marlow FM.
Yeah, I've been here a couple of times before, early on in the process, and Ellie and I were here recently and a few weeks ago.
And you finally made it to the best show on Marlow FM.
It's absolutely clear.
Good to have you here, and good to have you here as well, Ellie. Ellie's senior partner at Volterra, who, well, I'm going to ask you in a couple of minutes to tell me a little bit about Volterra. But so this is your third visit as well?
It's just my second visit.
Almost a beginner. Well, hopefully you have a good time. I found a really interesting website, which was vulture.com, and they have the best movie songs ranked, and I thought, I wonder how they decide what's best, but hey, let's not go there. So what I'm going to play now is number 2 on that list, and I'm going to close the show with number 1, so you can either Google it or you can play a little game with yourself and see if you could think what number 1 might be. But number 2 on that list is great song, Aerosmith with I Don't Want to Miss a Thing from the film Armageddon. So this is where listeners to the live show on Marlow FM heard the first piece of music. Don't forget that if you'd like to hear this piece of music, you will find a link to it in the notes. Aerosmith, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, number 2 on that list of best songs from films, and I shall be playing number 1 later. But first of all, I'm going to chat to Robert Laycock, who's founder and CEO of Marlow Film Studios. How does somebody do that? How do you get to be the CEO of a film studio?
That's a really interesting question. I was thinking about that on the way over here in the car, and I suppose it's like being a frog in a boiling pot as you just find yourself in that situation. I come from a family, I'm a third generation who've worked in entertainment in this county. And so ever since I was aware of life as a young, tiny person, I was in and around this business, which is, there's a lot of demystifying I have to do about it because it's a fascinating culture. And it is a culture. It's a bit like a romantic industry that very few people get the chance to actually see inside. But it's a very powerful culture.
What do you like most about it? I mean, the industry holds magic for so many people. For so many people, it involves going to the cinema or paying Netflix some money or whatever. But you're right there in it. What is it that really floats your boat about that?
What it is really clear is one of the deepest challenges of any, just thinking about it as a business challenge, a sort of organizational challenge. At its rawest, if you're producing a show or involved in a show, you're one of 600, maybe 1,000 people working on that show. And because there's no concrete product at the end of the day, you have to use incredible skills to harness for basically every show is a startup. And you have to start communicating a philosophy to get all those 600 people to pull in the right direction. And I think, as you probably know, it's hard enough to do with three or four people. So if you're starting up with 600 talented people who aren't actually making a physical product, it's really difficult to end up with a really profoundly interesting product. And that, for everybody involved, is one of the most exciting and thrilling challenges because it is particularly an unusual challenge, I'd say.
Yeah. It's I talk to many people in business, and that is really different. Normally they have a very clear idea of the end goal, and I suppose you do too. The end goal is a feature film or a studio that has been built or whatever it may be. But yeah, so let me ask you a question, and if you just want to say I don't want to answer that, then really that's fine. But what do you like least about being in the industry?
Well, I suppose there's a small matter of ego, because if you get 600 creative people in a few rooms, obviously there's blueprints in the form of a script and all that sort of thing. I'm talking about production here. I'm not talking about physical infrastructure. Everybody has their own taste about how things should be done. And, it's unlike most business processes. There's no gross margin. There's no gross profit. It is all about creating a very binary answer. Are you going to make a good product or not? So it's more like product development with a very, 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 very complicated team. And so ego is the thing that usually gets in the way of everything. Someone says, I don't like it, and trying to persuade them to do something they don't particularly agree with, or answering a question in such a way that enables them to do their best work. That is a fascinating and quite unusual process.
Yeah. I think there may be a lot of business people out there listening to this who recognise that ego is a problem in all sorts of businesses, but I do see that with a bunch of creatives it's potentially even more so. And the studio that you're working on making happen now, once upon a time there wasn't even an idea, and now you're quite advanced plans and proposals. How does that happen? How did you get involved in that?
Well, I think it goes back to that last point, really, is how do you make a place that is really comfortable for people to go and work in and deliver their best superb achievement? And that's not something that is striped through what is an amazing industry in this country. We are, less than a third of what's used to make films is purpose-built. So it's in old logistics sheds, it's in crazy environments. And what that does is it really degrades the human capital involved, because these are really high skill set jobs. They're quite stressful. They're super rewarding. But if you're asking somebody to effectively run really hard at a brick wall every time they start this, I mean, just anecdotally, so The Witcher is filming its third season, and it happens to now be the most popular show on Netflix on their service. So Netflix says, great, let's have loads more seasons. Let's just spend money on this. But because the feeble facilities they've been working in, they're all incredible burnout after 12 months delivering 10 episodes. They're on the floor because it's like running away to the circus every time. So the philosophy for how this came about is, this industry is really now grown up. It's one of the UK's most prestigious industries. It's desirable for so many reasons we can get into, but it's kind of still a Cinderella industry in infrastructure. And there's a, particularly unusual moment now. And this is what I saw very clearly starting this project more than 5 years ago, that with a quantum change in a sea change, there needed to be a sea change in attitude about facilities.
Okay, I like that. And we will certainly talk about what it is that's going to make Marlow Studios different in a minute. But before we do, I want to turn to Ellie Evans, who's senior partner at Volterra. Welcome to the show. So what's Volterra, and how does Volterra come to be involved in all of this?
Sure. Volterra is an economic consultancy. So we focus on demonstrating the economic, social, health, regeneration impact of major developments. We tend to focus on really large or innovative or slightly different schemes. So we've worked on the case for Crossrail, for example, which was about developing the business case, convincing Treasury that it was worth doing because it would bring more people into a very productive city centre. We've worked on High Speed 1, High Speed 2. We've also worked on major developments. So Battersea Power Station, a big regeneration project in London. London Resorts, a proposed theme park in Kent. A really wide range of projects. Cambridge Science Park, I've just come from there this morning. They're usually projects that are of national significance or at least regional significance, and you really need to clearly demonstrate what will the economic impact be of this. So how many jobs might it support? What might the social impact be? So in the context of residential development, should I build a primary school on site? In the context of commercial developments, how do I make sure people are getting access to these job opportunities, make sure that it's a diverse workforce, make sure people are actually happy on site? And so that's my kind of area of expertise. And I was brought in because for a scheme of this nature, you obviously need to understand the economic impacts, positive and negative, and social impacts. And so we are tasked with looking at that and also looking at an employment and skills strategy, working alongside Robert to think about how we can maximise job opportunities for local people and for people that need them most. So that's my role.
I'm almost speechless, which doesn't happen often on the radio. The word eminent comes to mind, particularly when you throw things like Crossrail and stuff in the conversation. So let me ask you, there's a question of why should a lovely film studio, and we'll come back to the word lovely shortly, why should a lovely film studio be built in the UK? And then there's a question of why should it be built in the Thames Valley or whatever area you choose to call this. And then there's a question of why should it be built in Marlow. Are you involved in addressing all three of those questions, and it's sort of drilling it down to the precise square footage that it will be placed on, or do you purely look at UK? Where do you fit with all of that?
So some involvement in all. I'm not the person that then sort of narrows down the sites you might look at on a map and goes out and says to Robert, go and look at this site or that site. But I'm certainly the person who thinks about where does it need to be to attract the types of film productions and high-end TV. So to be in the right location so that those films and TV productions want to be made there. And it's interesting you say, why would we build a film studio in the UK? And I think we don't sell ourselves enough on this. I don't think enough people realise that the UK is actually the filmmaking capital of the world. The number of films we've produced over the last 20 years has massively increased. We've overtaken California in terms of top grossing films. So it's a really profitable industry. The industry's delivering a trade surplus of about over 4 billion each year. What that means is we're exporting more than we're importing. That's a valuable commodity in terms of UK national economic growth. So that's why we should be doing it in the UK and why the UK is at the forefront. In terms of why a slightly sort of smaller geography than that, I've done a lot of work in my time around clusters, and cluster theory in economics is sort of widely accepted that when you get a specialism in a given sector, a cluster forms, and when a cluster forms, everybody in that sector is more productive. And so it is generally supported as theory that if you've got a strong cluster, you should support that cluster to continue growing, because when you grow that cluster, not only will you deliver the growth at Marlow Film Studios, the whole cluster will become more productive. And the reasons for that is because people want to be in close proximity to the right skilled staff. So we have a major crew base who have the skills in film and high-end TV in the West London cluster. We also have a brilliant supply chain. So as well as just those direct skills of the crew, you need the supply chain that supports that, all the different sorts of industries that are needed to sort of back that up. Given this particular industry, you also need the international connectivity. So you need to be able to get that talent, the A-list stars into a location. And you also need to be obviously within the cluster. So we've got Pinewood nearby, we've got Shepperton. And so that's why the kind of West London cluster. And then Marlow specifically falls within that cluster. So I guess that's where my specific advice ends, because from my perspective, to get those economic benefits, you need to be in the cluster. And then there come to be more specific site questions that wouldn't be my expertise around why this site has been picked, for example.
I sometimes get told that I ask good questions. I love it when people give me good answers, and that really was good. And we will dig into some of that more local stuff in a couple of minutes after the next piece of music. And Robert, you chose this for us, and interestingly, each of you chose film songs, and I thought, okay, I'll choose 2 film songs as well. So yours is Nobody Does It Better, Carly Simon. Would it be stupid of me to ask why you chose that?
Well, no. I mean, I think there are a lot of very famous songs associated with James Bond, and this month is a particularly special anniversary for James Bond. It was this time 60 years ago was the first production on Dr. No. I mean, literally this month.
Wow.
And we can talk about this later, but the reason this is so important is I think it does what it says on the tin, particularly with Bond and British filmmaking. Nobody really does it better.
I cannot think of a better way to introduce the track. Let's just play it. And this is where listeners on the radio heard the second piece of music. As you know, the link to hear it if you want to is in the notes. But now, on with the show. Delightful. Carly Simon, 60 years of James Bond. Good heavens above. Was that the one with Ursula Andress coming?
It was. That shook everybody. Interestingly, it was in the cinemas during the 13-day Cuban Missile Crisis. So 60 years on, not much has changed in terms of geopolitics. But, that's the amazing thing about Bond. Its arc of adventures covered all sorts of things, but not a lot's moved on in a strange way.
Yeah, the world is a bizarre place, that's for sure. And anyone who wants to try and predict what's next, good luck to you. What I want to do is predict what's next for Marlow Film Studios. We've mentioned a couple of times, and you've certainly mentioned a couple of times, about how good you intend it to be, how state-of-the-art, that will make people want to come and make films there. So what's the philosophy behind the studios? And after the philosophy, what is it that makes a great studio that is going to make Marlow Film Studios the place that production companies want to come and make films?
Yeah, so this goes back to this point about running away to the circus for each time you make a show. Just starting at the very macro level, the 10% of the US stock market is now in media and new media companies. So we're talking about incredible importance to a global economy. And the tilt from old media to new media involves rewarding people based on retaining viewership and eyeballs. So what that's meant is that this enormous investment in content, and like Bond, made in Britain, Star Wars made in Britain, lots of huge blockbusters. Statistically, we're better at making those things. But the problem is, if you don't have the facilities to capture the opportunity for people to go and work, to learn their trades, that's a big disincentive. But we are different. So I think you've heard how brilliant Ellie and her skills are. I mean, Ellie, not to be disrespectful of her, but she's one of 25 astonishing world-class people working on this project. And so we started from first principles. How do you look forward? And the reason we need to look forward is in an era, this US CPI statistics also, inflation is going to be running at an annualized 7%. So we, as a nation, have to think about how we prosper in the 21st century. We don't want to make mistakes. It turns out Germany, for the last 20 years, have built their growth on an unsustainable product, which is gas supply from despots. That is really clear. The point about the film industry and why it has so much potential is it's very human-led. You don't need raw materials. All you need is human capital. And for me, there's no doubt that this is a very prestigious industry. It only was in California accidentally. It was a European product making films and telling stories. And it was only because of the hideous part of the first half of the 20th century with wars and destruction that it got exported to California because there was sunlight, so they didn't have to pay for power. And if you think about making films in California, that's a nightmare place to go. It's thousands of miles from anywhere. It's in a desert. There's no water. It's congested. It's fine if you're going to make sword and sandal epics, but nowadays people want to do emotional storytelling. And while it's pivoting to the UK, we've had 100 years of the BBC, 60 of Bond, 15 of tax credits. And so everybody's been pulling this incredible direction to focus what is a very life-enhancing, skills-enhancing, very powerful soft power industry here. And hearing Ellie talk about the cluster, I think it's invisible to people. But Pinewood is the global epicenter, really, of filmmaking. It goes north to Warner Brothers and south to Shepperton. But here in this very close local community, there are world-beating talents. I mean, I could name you 4 incredible, prestigious directors of $200 million movies that live within 5 miles of here.
Wow.
But that just also conceals an incredible layer of talent. I was speaking to one of the ex-department heads of the BBC, and he said even 30 years ago, 5 of the top department heads of the BBC lived in Marlow. That's a fascinating reason why here. How you turn that philosophy into an attractive place to work it's not actually that complicated. There's the quasi-legal process of planning, which is unholy and needs every skill set any human being could ever want or need. But the essentials are looking forward to what the industry needs and answering it by providing facilities, providing really attractive places to go and work. Nowadays, multinationals have these incredible facilities for doing the best product. Because this is a creative process where everything is abstract, and added to that the layer of everybody who works in it is pretty much in freelance. It's not like there's a huge employee base that's on salary. Everybody goes between show to show. But rather like I was talking about with The Witcher, the orders for shows now are not because of streaming. You're not making a 60-minute show. You're making maybe 10 hours of content a year across 7 years. So you could be making 70 hours of TV, like Game of Thrones, like The Crown, like the things that we do so brilliantly. And that brings a step change in the facilities you need to make sure that people don't have a burnout. They can genuinely go to work. In a place that doesn't go quiet, doesn't go dead. So there's a very careful formula that goes into designing this thing. And that's why we are very design heavy and design led.
I think it's fair to say that everybody that starts a business and everybody that starts a film studio business wants to have something that is quality, that is the best, that is what their customers will want, and tick all of those boxes. Can you give me some examples of anything that you've got planned, if it's not commercially sensitive, that will make people in the film industry say, oh, that's good, I've got to go there?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is, what do human beings need? And actually, even if you look at the most prestigious developments all over the world, they are in a space, an envelope, which is sort of rough and ready. We're atypical because we're trying to articulate a sense of place. I mean, the amazing person who's done our master plan, Jason Pryor, he was appointed by the International Olympic Committee to do the 2012 Olympics. And so we've tried to import a lot of his philosophy about placemaking, about delivering an integrated answer for delivering an exceptionally attractive place to go and work. Now, that is atypical, unfortunately, in the movie business because it's based on impermanence, really. But now we have this pivot to permanence. For 7 years would be a long time in any business. And it used to be that actors, directors would move hand to mouth and they would not know where their next job was coming. That's not any longer a problem in Britain, particularly, because we're so in demand, and the West Coast would love to spend literally billions on UK content being produced day in, day out. So it's very unusual, this, and why us in Britain, where we've got such a cultural depth to our storytelling. And I think that there's always been that recognition and why all these big shows have been here. But coming in this scale is because it's also counter-cyclical, this industry. It's in the Great Depression, people bought more movie tickets. If you're in making investment decisions, do you invest in offices right now? No, I mean, you don't. You invest in stuff that actually people need to show up and do.
I like that approach, and I think focusing on the people and what the people want will make most businesses successful, and I see no reason for that to be different for you. Ellie, I have a much easier question for you, which is, why did you choose 9 to 5 Dolly Parton for us today?
I'd love to give you a clever answer, but it genuinely is just my favourite song. I think Dolly Parton's a legend. I heard about her, she was saying something about selling her back catalogue on the radio this morning. She's just brilliant, and it's a super song.
I also saw her on Breakfast TV this morning, by bizarre coincidence, talking about a children's book that she's written and a novel that she's writing and stuff. She is a phenomenon, and when I first started doing the business show on Marlow FM, 9 to 5 was something that guests regularly chose to play, and we haven't played it for ages, so it's nice to be having it back. Here she is, the great Dolly Parton. And the third piece of music is now playing for listeners, or should I say was now playing for listeners on the radio. You can listen to it by clicking on the link in the notes, and the rest of the show is coming up now. I do try hard not to sing along in the studio, but it doesn't always work, so my apologies to the people in the studio. And I will remind listeners that you're listening to Marlow FM. This is the business show. I am Mark Harris, and I have Robert Laycock with me, founder and CEO of Marlow Film Studios. I also have Ellie Evans, senior partner of Volterra, who chose 9 to 5 for us. Thank you, Ellie. And I want to turn to you, Ellie, and talk for the last chunk of the show about the impact of the studio on the assumption, number one, that it gets built because there will be a construction phase, and then number two, when it is a living, breathing film studio with lots of stuff going on, the impact on businesses in the area. And I'm happy to let you define the word area. It doesn't necessarily just mean Marlow. And clearly there's lots of questions about traffic movements, there's issues about green belt, there's all sorts of things that motivate people to have a view on this. But because this is the business show, I want to focus on the businesses and the impact on those. So if I run a local business, what will the impact on me be? And clearly it's going to vary from business to business, but I bet you can tell me some good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just in terms of how we think about the impact from the different geographical scales. Robert mentioned the freelancers, the film crews that would be operating out of the site. So we've estimated that there'll probably be around 2,000 to 2,500 of those. Then what we do, thinking about economic impact, we call it a multiplier impact. So what else happens as a result of that? And in this industry, in media and in tourism, there tends to be a multiplier of about 2. So that's nice and simple. It just means for every one direct job on site, you expect there to be another one somewhere within the supply chain. Now that, in terms of somewhere, geographically, obviously that can vary. In reality, some of those will be far and wide, but a significant portion of those will also be local. And I guess where I would mostly define it, I talked earlier about the West London cluster. There are a lot of suppliers within that area. So we would expect quite a large proportion to be in that area. And in terms of the evidence base for that, Pinewood's got some great stats on where their suppliers are. So about 30% of their general suppliers are within 23 kilometres. That actually rises to 50% for their major film productions being within 29 kilometres. So a large proportion will be local, or not necessarily local, Marlow local, but within that kind of Buckinghamshire area. I guess that is evidenced by, so Bucks recently produced their skills strategy. One of the main things they found was that they've got more than 2 times the UK average number of people in creative industries in Buckinghamshire, and that industry has grown rapidly. So you've got that starting point. I know you're going to ask me more specifics.
Okay. Yeah. What I was going to ask is really, I suppose, the subject of cause and effect. Is it that the studio arrives and uses local businesses, and the studios you're talking about, Pinewood and Shepperton, I don't know, probably the 1920s or 30s, nearly 100 years ago now, but there are clearly more modern studios around. So is it that they arrive and use local businesses, or do they arrive and then appropriate businesses, whether it's set builders or wig makers or whatever it may be, from all around think, hey, I'd better move to near them?
It's a good question, and the answer is a bit of both. You want to be in the cluster because there are already the set builders, the security firms, the florists, the hotels, etc. But, and we use this term additionality, one of the reasons why Robert and the team want to build this studio is that there is such excess demand to produce film and high-end TV content in the UK. So whereas if you build one supermarket next to another supermarket, there's still the same number of people wanting to do their shopping. So somebody might move from one supermarket to the other. With this industry, we're competing globally. So there have been lots of studies showing the excess amount of the films that would have been produced in the UK had the space been available, but they've gone somewhere else. So a lot of this will be additional in terms of new films and new products being produced, and therefore a lot of the supply chain will also be growth happening. And all of that is in line with what's planned in the area anyway, because as population grows, we need more jobs for people, we need to skill people for those jobs, and it is the LEP's plan that a lot of the growth in this area will be in those creative industries. So, it is meeting those needs and it is delivering on that growth.
Can I answer that slightly differently? So the point about we're designed to capture about 3.5 huge tentpole features a year, which sort of means on Mission Impossible. So there's some really interesting stats. So one of those films is about $220 million. 1/3 of the spending goes on crew, so it's about $75 million. And the jobs that Ellie's referred to are completely new jobs. So the 2,500 who'd work on site there, brand new film crew jobs. Okay. So that's 75 million, and those opportunities will be available all over the place, and we're making a really interesting effort to train people up. But then beyond that, so 2/3 of the money that comes usually from the West Coast, I can just run through the stats. So 12% of that is business support. So if you support a regular business, that'll be in demand. Construction is 11%. So if you run a construction business, it'll be available. And 8% is travel and transport. Hospitality and catering is 6%. So you're talking about big, big numbers. And if you run any of those businesses locally, that wave of investment is there to be caught. We're not going to contracts, but it is that halo effect that Ellie was talking about. If you run anything from health and medical to travel and transport, if you run a travel agency, if you run a restaurant, that money is more likely to be spent locally, because once you've got 600 people working on one show, spending that $200 million, maybe $2 million a day, that's just going to be pumped out into the local economy.
And I suppose in some respects, a recent guest on this show has 2 restaurants in Windsor, which is not very far away, certainly within the catchment area. So on one hand, he should be really happy if this goes ahead, because one of his 2 is quite high end, so the high-flying film stars and stuff will love to go there. So that's a real positive for him. However, every other restaurateur for miles around and way outside the catchment area might be thinking, okay, all this money's flowing into Marlow, best I open a restaurant in the area. So that's actually going to increase his competition, potentially to his detriment.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure it's a zero-sum game, because the money comes first. So I think that there's not like anybody's going to be building thousands more restaurants here. There's an incredible restaurant number of choices here. If I was sitting in a restaurant, I wouldn't want to compete in Marlow, because it's a really exciting, thriving place to be a foodie business.
Okay, so supposing you're someone more film industry related, like a wig maker, a dressmaker, a set builder, whatever, again, I would sort of expect people in those industries across the country, across Europe and beyond, to think, let's open up in Marlow, let's try and get some of that business, so that it can. I'm just seeing it, I'm not saying it's a negative, I'm just seeing it as a double-edged sword. And from your perspective, yes, you will be spending locally, but it's not necessarily with the people who are already here, it could be with new arrivals, and I guess that's down to the local people to make sure that they build the relationships with you, that they're offering the best product, the best service, an appropriate price, and they get their fair share of that business.
And I think that, I'll let Ellie speak in a sec, but I think that comes down to her really powerful point about clusters. Yes. There's a reason that certain places are renowned for stuff. And it may not be apparent to everybody, but there are a lot of these incredible trades here. So the ability to grow those trades, we're not talking about sort of invisible businesses appearing, they're here already. Pinewood has one of the, kind of is world leading in terms of what it draws in. There is already that ecosystem. It just will thrive a lot more. So it's really about opportunity. It's not really about crowding stuff out.
If you want, I guess, practical examples of the sorts of companies that support and benefit, the Pinewood expansion that's recently been permitted, there's a planning application in Bray. Both of those are in the public domain and they have big lists of letters of support. I was looking through a few yesterday. The Bray ones, there's diving supply company that locates there because they were needed for a given film. There's also a cottage company that has seen maximum occupancy because people are coming and staying there. And there's also a security firm. There's all sorts of the firms in support, and there are practical examples of those in the letters they've written in other areas. And I don't see any reason why Marlow would be any different in that regard.
Part of my job here is to be challenging, and my wife will tell you that I'm sometimes very challenging. But hey, so I like to throw out some of those questions. Where do you see, if we look forward to the point where, I'll say hopefully from your perspective, the studio has been built, it's up and running, there's been a few of those $220 million films going, it's sort of, if we fast forward, 4 or 5 years, how do you see the impact on the area at that point? Do you see the studio as being a major focal point? If anybody says Pinewood or Shepperton, studio is the first word that comes into my head. Do you see it having that level of impact on the area, or a little bit more low key?
For me, I'll give Robert the final word, but for me, I absolutely think it will be, but I think the biggest legacy it could deliver would be an amazing employment and skills strategy, collaboratively working with the universities and the colleges that already exist here that have film courses and other creative courses, and making sure that what is a brilliant industry becomes a more diverse and inclusive one, and we get a better representation across the whole of society, and it delivers genuine opportunities for young people.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a really nice mix here. I don't think it's going to capture the culture of the place. What it is going to be an enhancement to an already fantastic place to be. It's not designed to crowd out anything. It's very, very clear that this industry is kind of invisible in many ways. So not many people have actually been to Pinewood and don't understand what goes on there. There's a mystique about it. It's not sort of designed to turn Marlow into Hollywood on Thames at all. I mean, if you've been to Hollywood recently, it isn't exactly a strong place in itself.
No, I have, and it isn't.
Yeah.
I posted on LinkedIn that this show was going to be happening, and somebody who I know, like and trust, referred to the studio as Mollywood. And I'm delighted that you're both smiling, because you might have got upset by that. But yeah, there's Hollywood and Bollywood, so I think having Mollywood would be very interesting. Or maybe not. I almost hope it catches on. One last thing in maybe a minute. If I'm running a business in Marlow, any sort of business in or near Marlow, on balance, should I be worried or happy that the studio is coming?
I think really happy. There are going to be so many direct and indirect job opportunities for a whole host of firms across, obviously, firstly construction and then once operational. I think there are lots of opportunities.
I would also just point to what our competitors are doing. So the state of Georgia is spending 4.5% of its state budget to attract exactly this kind of work.
Wow.
There's 15 years of tax credit. So if you pour through the data, this is an incredibly beneficial thing. People were fighting over these kind of positive impacts.
Absolutely. I do agree. And personally, I think it's going to be a really good thing for Marlow businesses, and time will tell if we are all right. Time is what we've run out of. I want to say a really big thank you to Robert Laycock, CEO of Marlow Film Studios, and Ellie Evans, Senior Partner of Volterra. Thank you both for coming. If anybody wants to go to marlow.film, they will be able to see all about the studios and sign up for updates. I'm going to finish the show as promised with the number one film voted for as number one piece of music from a film. This is, of course, from Titanic, Celine Dion, My Heart Will Go On. And now the final piece of music in the show was playing, and that's the end of the show. If you want to listen to that piece of music, as you know, the link is in the notes. And I really hope you enjoyed today's show, and I really hope you heard some things of benefit to your business. There will be another episode along soon, but for now, this is Mark Harris signing off.